Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Police officers of Reddit, have you ever been called to a home for a paranormal reason? Episode 6. Anson, Texas boasts the Anson lights. Mysterious lights that you can summon by parking at a specific crossroads and flashing your lights. They will bounce back and forth across the road as they come near you. Freaky stuff, and if you're ever in the area you should check it out. The story is about the Great Depression. A small child wandered out of its home. Upon discovering the child was missing, its mother grabbed a lantern and went looking for the child. The child is presumed to have frozen to death in the winter weather, and the mother, the light, is still searching for her child. Who knows if the story is true, but I do know the lights are real. You drive out past the crossroads on this specific road, and you park facing the main road. It's on a bit of a bowl-type area, so you know you're not seeing lights from the road behind where the Anson light shows up. You flash your headlights and then you wait. You'll see this light appear and it will come bobbing down the road towards you. It never gets to you, and if you drive towards it, lights on or off, it will disappear. There's a similar phenomenon near me in TN. It's not well known, but it does work on certain nights. It's said to be a ghost or some such. Some friends and I went out there one night to observe it, and, sure enough, it was there. All you had to do was drive on this road and stop at a certain point. It only worked on humid/foggy nights. We did some experimentation. We drove down that road with our lights off, not a big deal, you can see anything coming with lights, and it's a very seldom used country road, and nothing happened. We had a spotlight with us and turned it on going down the road, and the light was there, but just slightly different. It wasn't quite as big and wasn't as wobbly. Maybe that's the right word. We were pretty convinced that it's just a trick of light refraction at this point, especially since that area is very often really humid and or wet. We went back the next day during the daylight and did some reconnaissance. We found some old pie pans stuck to trees, glass bottles in brush, etc., and a series of small creek beds. At this point, we're convinced of the refraction idea. The next night, which was of similar humidity, we went back and, having noted the locations of the pie pans and other things, we determined that the ghost lights were, indeed, simply light bouncing off the pie pans and light fog. I am not a police officer, I was the one to call the police officers. It was late one night, roughly 11 p.m. at my house in the cul-de-sac of a small suburban community. My friends just left. We were smoking some decent bud, nothing too extraordinary, but enough to make me crash out on my living room couch with all the lights on. There's a knock on the door. I have that nice haze you have from waking up from a weed nap. I go answer, and there's a shirtless bloody Latin/Mexican man leaning on the wall to the left of the door. He's been in a car crash, he said, and needs help. I told him to hold on. I went in to grab the phone. I headed back to the door, dialing 911 into the phone. I open the door, he's gone. Click end call. There is something that is absent in me to realize that a 911 call is instantly tracked and attended to. It's roughly 1 to 2 a.m. at this point. I'm on the computer and the police have arrived. They step me out of my house to question me. I will explain to them about the instance, and they say there are no signs of a car accident. It's not a big community, so a car crash would be easy to notice. Then the female police officer looks at me and just say, "You know, sir. You are as high as a kite right now." The weirdest cliché thing to be told to by a police officer. God damn it. It was too vivid and real. I definitely wasn't dreaming. I either was talking to no one or there was an actual being there. Both bother me. I'm a paramedic. I responded to a call which was dispatched as, "There are black creatures in my anus." When we were done having our laugh, we went into this mid-60s woman's apartment and she's bent over in the kitchen with baking soda all over her lips, her butt, everything. She's complaining of back pain. I'm asking her if she fell / etc. No, the black creatures have been causing her back to butt pain because they reside in her rectum. She says, "Look. There's one over there." She points to the dining room, covered in baking soda, no furniture, no creatures. My partner starts walking around the house, he comes back a minute later. Tell me to have a look. He takes over doing vitals. I proceed to the bedroom. The TV is on Maury and the couch is upside down, there is no bed. I peek in her bathroom. It's spotless and empty except for two things. A pile of multicolored miniature dollar store paint rollers, all glossy and used, from a 2L tub of Vaseline 2/3 empty on the other side of the sink. I stand there for a moment putting two and two together, a chill runs down my spine. The whole place is nearly empty otherwise. We roll her out on the stretcher, all the neighbors are in the hallway watching us go by. They know. While working for the state, I can't say I've had any paranormal experiences but had a few working private securities. I worked at one school where we quit on the spot, one officer a month, midnight shift, in an old carriage house. In another building there were old carnival people, nothing phases them, as janitors, who would walk up to the elevator and it would open. They would say thank you. They'd walk into a classroom and the lights would come on and they'd say thank you. I tried desperately to see how that worked to no avail. Finally, I asked them and they said the place was haunted. They had such a laissez-faire attitude towards it, that I started saying thank you when the elevator opened for me, or a light came on. Often security used to meet in their cemetery, nothing ever happened there, but our roving cranky boss was afraid to enter it. Smiley face. At another incredibly old school we had too many buildings and too few staff, so we used sheets and flashlights, to make believe ghosts, in the attic windows to help keep the building secure from the resident students on the campus. We made up stories that grew. We'd leave large bones and dishes of water in the hallway. Had a bobcat tape, which used to scare the students, and staff, fairly good. I've been spooked by a bunch of buildings, but I did them no harm, so the uneasiness didn't last long. I got to really like the night despite a few bad people, skunks, snapping turtles etc. I was happy to have them turn out most of the lighting in the unoccupied summer months. I even hiked the mountains at night, in winter with a moon solo. I liked working solo. In my office time, I used to sit on the roof overlooking the entire campus. In summer, I'd bring my coyote to the campus. He never made a sound but would alert me if a lights out vehicle or walking person entered his vision from the roof. The students often called me a ghost as I tapped them on the shoulder as they were sneaking in a back window after curfew. I really didn't care what time they came in, but, in this instance, was an all-girls school, I really didn't want them propping open doors and windows to the dorm. One time they told me they were going to ring the fire alarm. I told them it would ring all night long and I wouldn't clear the building until morning. They never pulled it and not one ever got hurt by all the wackos that tried. This isn't quite what you asked, but it's in the same vein. I'm a bartender at a fairly upscale restaurant, and one of our regulars suffers from dementia. At first, she would come in and talk about things being moved in her pantry, claiming someone broke into her house. She assured us that the neighborhood was taking care of it though, so we didn't think much about it. One night though, she came in panicked, saying that someone had tried to poison her. We didn't know she had dementia at the time, so we called a police officer to take her home and check things out but didn't hear back about it. When she came in the next time claiming that communists were hiding in her cupboards and stealing her food, it became clear what was really going on. Unfortunately, after we called the police officers for her the first time, she decided that was a good thing to do, so, they're getting a lot of calls about sneaky, food poisoning communists these days. It's sad to see, but there's not much you can do other than play along occasionally and show kindness consistently. Not a police officer, but I did call 911. I suffer from night terrors and sleep paralysis and generally have trouble sleeping. One night before bed I was watching YouTube videos, this one in particular. I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard men yelling at the top of their lungs outside of my apartment. I lived close to a strip club/bar, and instigating fights, and someone dropped the N-word, and I thought that was going to go down. In my half-asleep state, I called 911 and told the dispatcher what was happening. As I'm on the phone I start waking up and realize the voices are gone, and I tell the dispatcher that everyone is gone and there's no issue. I fell back into a deep sleep after that and didn't remember what had happened until the next day. That's the only time I've ever called 911, and it turned out I was dreaming. Not a police officer, but I used to work at the courts of my county. I had lunch with police officers all the time, and I asked this question once. I love scary stories and the paranormal. One of them did have a story. Basically, an officer Stanley, if I remember correctly, was on a solo car patrol when a call came in about a bunch of guys working on a house on the outskirts of the town. It was an old house that had been abandoned for some time, and it was being renovated by the local government for some reason or another. According to the 5 or so men who were working on it, someone or something had attacked them. They didn't get a particularly good look at him, and got out of the house to call the police immediately. Well, Officer Stanley gets there just before the ambulance. The guy who's wounded had a broken arm, and some old nails lodged into his shoulder. One of the men thinks the others are being paranoid, and he thinks something simply fell on the wounded man. Stanley decides to have a look. I remember that he got really uncomfortable when telling this part. Even if there was nothing supernatural about what happened, it really spooked him. Long story short, he doesn't find anything inside, but he feels a presence watching him. When he tries to call out with his radio, he can't get anyone, but he swears he heard an odd voice on the radio shouting expletives at him. I remember him saying that he felt extremely unwelcome. Nothing happened though. He left the building without getting possessed or seeing anything explicitly supernatural, probably just his mind playing tricks on him. No, I don't know what became of the building. This is extremely common in my neurology clinic. Patients complain of being under attack by burglars, robbers, demons, ghosts, or other paranormal beings. They see these hallucinations, mostly at night. Small humans, Lilliputian hallucinations are common, and for whatever reason it is quite common to see people in period garb. There is a page in The World According to Garp where an older fellow hallucinates Charlemagne's soldiers, night after night, standing around the fountain outside his window. That is the kind of thing my patients see. The diseases in which it is most common are Lewy body dementia and Parkinson disease dementia, which tend to have an earlier onset than Alzheimer's disease. Patients with classic run-of-the-mill Alzheimer's disease rarely go this way. It depends on their medications and what sort of personality they have, whether they just ignore these hallucinations, or whether they respond with paranoia by phoning police, prowling the house at all hours, or even getting a firearm and firing it at them. Obviously, shooting guns at ghosts or repeatedly calling the police officers because of hallucinations are things that aren't compatible with healthy community living. When I can't get these symptoms under control with drugs, these folks get institutionalized in homes for the elderly demented. Not myself a police officer, but my grandfather, who was part of the story, had been, and the police were, obviously, involved. Around 1926 my grandparents moved into a smart terraced house in what was then a mining boom town. Their neighbor was a butcher. He had a shop in the single high street which ran through the narrow valley town. They lived further up the hillside where the housing had been constructed. A little further down the hill, just above the main road, was a social club. It sold cheap beer to the colliers and business people. My grandparents' neighbor had some sort of apprentice, and this kid was about 17, or younger. He did not normally open up the shop himself, as the boss was normally there himself at an early hour. This particular day, the boss wasn't there when the kid turned up. So, he guessed maybe there was something wrong. He walked up the hill to the man's house, looked through the window, and saw something nasty. The butcher had turned his wife and daughters into joints which were laid out neatly on the front room table and killed himself. There were inquiries to find out what anybody knew of the man's actions the night before, and the patrons of the club stated that although the man concerned was not known as a heavy drinker, he had been in the club the night before. He had drunk a pint or so, then left. He returned an hour or so later in a state of distress and drank a lot more very quickly. So, where does the paranormal bit come in? My grandmother wasn't incredibly happy about staying where she was. She was a religious lady, and also, kind of dominant, and by that time my grandfather was well on the way to becoming what he considered a rich man by local standards. They moved out to a smarter place. What happened to the house where this business happened? Well, according to our family story, before my grandparents moved out, the neighbor's house was sold to the most unobservant, unconcerned, thick-headed man in the town. The local milkman. When my relatives asked him if he had ever felt uncomfortable living in a house where such a tragedy had occurred, he said no. We hear the kids running up and down the corridor upstairs now and again sometimes. My neighbors called the police officers once for what they thought was a break-in. One of the police officers came over to my house and asked me a few questions. Did you see anyone suspicious in the area last night? Did you hear any noises, that kind of thing? The next day I saw my neighbor out raking leaves and I asked what had happened. Apparently he heard voices in the kitchen and then the sound of something breaking at around 4 in the morning. Walked into the kitchen to find a set of plates that had been in the cabinet smashed on the floor. The cabinet was closed and all the doors in the house were locked. The guy lived there alone with his 2 daughters, one of them was walking and talking a little, probably 2 years old and the other was maybe 1 year old, maybe. No way they could have done it. He was really freaked and a month or so later he moved out. A new couple lives there now, and they've been there for a year. No weirdness so far, or at least nothing to call the police officers over. My dad was a police officer. He told me about this really old lady who lived alone, and husband had died. She believed her husband was taken by aliens. She would call a couple of times a week saying that the aliens were searching for her. And about to take over her brain. Stuff like that. My dad usually took the call. After a few times he took the call with his friend. When they got there they would always check around and tell her it was okay. After a while, my dad's friend got tired of coming here all the time and went into her kitchen and gave her a metal bowl to put over her head saying it blocks the alien signal to get to her brain. After that, the calls went from a few times a week to a few times every 2 weeks. And every time they got called there they would give her ideas to stop the aliens and eventually she stopped calling. Not a police officer, but when my grandfather died, a nurse apparently came in to see him when my mother was there, literally just before he passed and called him, F, it's okay F. This wouldn't be odd, but he went by another name and hadn't been called F since childhood by his mother. I think it was even down on his medical records as one he went by. Not long after he passed I was taken into hospital for a few weeks and missed his funeral, which really upset me. One night I swear, and it is still one of the oddest experiences I've ever had, he appeared to me in a dream, we spoke and I got my chance to say goodbye, then we got into a boat and drove down the river to a kind of dock place where a large ship had just set sail. I got out and he continued on to catch up to the ship. This happened about 8.5 years ago. I remember so little of my time in hospital I couldn't even tell you who visited me and when, despite having little to do aside from visiting time, but this is still absolutely clear to me even down to what the sides of the river looked like. Not a police officer, but my family experienced paranormal activity once in our life. We were living abroad, in Southeast Asia, where spirituality is a part of life. We moved into a building on a hill overlooking the jungle when I was 3 in an affluent neighborhood of the country's capital city. The building had many apartments and one big house at the bottom of the hill, which is where we lived. When I was 5 we were hosting a leaving dinner party when all of a sudden we heard a bang. A guest bathroom, with doors on opposite sides of the room, had shut and locked itself on both sides. My dad uses a screwdriver to open the lock and there was nobody/nothing to be found inside. Creepy. It gets worse. My auntie came to visit shortly after and she claimed to see an old woman every night wandering the top floor of the house, an entity my mum told me a few weeks ago she would often see when we lived there. The spirits were not malevolent but seemed disturbed apparently, and I would often see many black cats roaming around outside. Before we left we got a monk to come and check the place out. He said that the building had been constructed on top of an old Buddhist burial site, something that is usually not allowed, and that the spirits were not able to rest peacefully. Furthermore, he indicated that the banana tree outside of our kitchen was a hub for spirits to hang out. My parents confronted the landlord, who confirmed the place was haunted. I'm not very spiritual, hence my use of apostrophes when describing the situation, at the moment, but some odd stuff has happened. My parents now always practice feng shui in our house.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.